The wind that night did not sing. It howled, low and endless, as if the earth itself had forgotten warmth. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, swallowing the sound of the world. Inside, Eleanor Finch sat by the stove, her golden hair loose over her shoulders, the ends damp from melted frost. The last log burned thin and red, throwing shadows across the small room, where every board remembered loneliness. She drew her shawl tighter and listened to the silence that came after storms, the kind that pressed against her ribs until her own heartbeat sounded foreign. For 5 winters she had lived this way, half alive in the valley beyond the ridge, far from town and farther still from what she once was. She used to sing while she cooked, used to braid her hair, used to believe someone might come back for her. Now she spoke only to the kettle and the wind. Her fiancé's grave rested beneath the frozen birch outside. No marker but the one she carved herself, a single word. Waited. The kettle hissed. She poured herself weak tea, and stared through the frosted windowpane. The horizon had disappeared under a veil of white. It was the kind of storm that erased even footprints, the kind that made a person wonder if God had turned his face away. She had stacked her firewood, salted the meat, and resigned herself to the long, cold watch of another night, until movement flickered beyond the glass. At first, she thought the wind was playing tricks, a branch, maybe, bowing under snow. But then a darker shape took form, swaying, slow and deliberate. A man. He came out of the blizzard like a ghost, tall and heavy-shouldered, wrapped in a fur cloak that shimmered with frost. Behind him trudged a weary horse, its breath steaming like smoke. He leaned forward with the effort of each step, one arm cradling something close to his chest. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. She snatched the shotgun from the wall, the one her father had left her, though the barrel was rusted from years of damp air. No one came this way, not in such weather, not without reason. The knock, when it came, was soft but deliberate. "Ma'am," came a voice, deep and low, with the slow cadence of someone not born to her tongue. "Can we stay one night?" She didn't answer. The latch trembled under his knuckles again, gentle as prayer. She edged closer, eyes fixed on the door. "Who's we?" she called, her voice small in the storm's roar. A pause. Then, as if in answer, a faint cry, a baby's cry, rose from the other side. It was thin and desperate, the sound of life refusing to quit. Eleanor hesitated, her breath clouding the air. The snow hissed against the shutters, as though urging her to decide quickly. Finally, she unbarred the door. The wind burst through first, carrying the man and his burden with it. He filled the doorway, tall, broad, his hair white as ash, his face carved by years and cold. His skin, copper-dark beneath the frost, told her he was Apache. For a long, taut moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. She had heard every story the townsfolk whispered: raids, vengeance, blood. Yet what she saw before her was no raider. He looked as if the storm itself had beaten him down. The bundle in his arms stirred, a newborn, wrapped in rough hides, its cheeks flushed from the cold. The baby's small fist waved once before falling still. "Please," he said again. Her hand tightened around the shotgun's barrel, but something broke inside her, a sound like thawing ice. She stepped aside. "Only one night." He nodded once, an old warrior's bow, and crossed the threshold. Snow followed him in a ghostly swirl before the door shut against it. Eleanor set the gun down, motioned toward the stove. "Put the child near the heat." He moved with reverence, crouching low as he laid the baby beside the flickering fire. She saw the careful way his hands adjusted the blanket, how he shielded the infant from the draft. When he looked up, his eyes caught the firelight. Gray, clouded with exhaustion but still sharp. "Thank you," he murmured. She gave no answer. Her pulse still raced, her mind searching for sense. An Apache man with a baby. Where had he come from? Whose child was it? Yet questions felt small beside the sound of the infant's breathing. She ladled warm milk into a tin cup, softened it with water, and handed it over. He fed the baby with hands too large for such a fragile task. Outside, the storm clawed at the roof, but inside the world had shrunk to the small circle of firelight that held 3 lives together. She noticed his clothes, torn buckskin, bloodstains frozen into the seams. A raw wound showed beneath one sleeve. Still, his posture was straight, his dignity intact. "You're hurt," she said quietly. He shook his head. "Not bad. Just old." His mouth curved with something that might have been humor, though it passed quickly. She found herself studying him. The fine lines at his temples, the white streaks in his hair, the silence he carried like a second cloak. When he unwrapped the child briefly to check its warmth, she saw beads woven into the hide blanket, red and white, crafted by hand. Her heart clenched. She remembered the night her fiancé had gone to trade with the same tribe, and never returned. The townsman had brought her his torn coat and half a story. She had spent months hating what she didn't understand. Yet this man, older now, sat on her floor feeding a baby with the same gentleness she once dreamed of giving her own. "Where are you headed?" she asked, though her voice was gentler than she meant it to be. He looked toward the window, where the world was still buried under white. "No place now. Just passing through the storm." Something in those words settled deep in her chest, a truth she knew too well. As the hours passed, she tended the fire, mended the torn edge of the baby's blanket, and tried not to watch the way the man's eyes softened whenever the child sighed in sleep. When she finally asked the baby's name, he hesitated. "No name yet," he said. "Born 3 nights ago. Mother gone." Her hands stilled. She looked at the tiny bundle and then at him. "And the father?" He did not answer. The silence spoke louder than any words could. Outside, the wind began to quiet, leaving only the soft crackle of fire. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and warm milk. Eleanor poured 2 cups of tea, set one near him. He looked at it for a long moment before lifting it in both hands, a gesture of respect. They drank without speaking. Somewhere between the creak of wood and the sigh of snow against the walls, something fragile passed between them. Not forgiveness yet, but the ghost of it. When the clock struck midnight, she rose to check the shutters. The world outside had turned silver, the moon a faint bruise behind clouds. She could see the tracks that had brought him here already half erased. "You can sleep by the fire," she said, her tone practical but her throat tight. "The baby stays near the stove. It's warmer." He inclined his head. "You are kind." "I'm not," she replied softly, setting down her cup. "Just tired of ghosts." For a moment he watched her, as though her words had touched something buried long ago. Then he lay down near the hearth, his fur cloak spread beneath him. The baby stirred once, tiny fingers curling around the air, then drifted back to sleep. Eleanor sat awake longer, listening to the rhythm of their breathing. The storm had softened to a whisper, and the fire painted everything gold. She looked at the man's face, lined, worn, utterly still, and wondered what grief could drive someone so far through snow with a newborn in his arms. Her gaze drifted to the baby, then back to him. In the flicker of flame, she noticed something. A bead on the child's blanket carved from bone, etched with a small, unmistakable cross. Her breath caught. It was a Christian charm, one she'd seen before, on the necklace of her dead fiancé. The cup slipped from her hand and clattered softly to the floor. Outside, the wind sighed through the chimney like a warning. Inside, she stared at the sleeping faces by the fire, her heart pounding in the silence. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Finch was afraid not of being alone, but of what she might soon learn. Morning broke pale and brittle, the kind of light that made even breath look breakable. Eleanor woke to silence. No wind, only the faint crackle of cooling embers. The storm had passed, but the world outside lay buried, white and endless. Her cabin looked smaller in the stillness, as though the snow itself leaned close to listen. The Apache still slept near the hearth, his face softened by dawn. The baby, wrapped in Eleanor's wool shawl, rested on his chest, its tiny hand rising and falling with his breathing. She stood there for a moment, unsure what startled her more, the sight of a stranger in her home or the strange peace it brought. She brewed coffee, the scent filling the cabin like memory. When he stirred, she noticed the deep lines etched beneath his eyes, the gray in his lashes, the small tremor in his hands as he reached for the cup. He drank without a word. Outside, the world was a frozen ocean, fences buried, trees bowed low. The storm had trapped them both. "You should rest another day," she said quietly. "The drifts'll swallow a horse whole." He looked toward the window, where sunlight bounced off the snow so bright it hurt. "One day," he agreed. He stepped outside soon after, his large figure cutting a dark mark against the pale morning. She watched through the window as he began chopping wood, each swing clean and steady despite his age. Steam rose from his shoulders where frost had gathered. He worked like a man paying off a debt, every motion carrying silent gratitude. When the baby woke crying, Eleanor lifted it into her arms. Its warmth startled her, the living weight of it, the soft heartbeat beneath its ribs. She hummed an old tune she hadn't sung since her fiancé's death, her voice trembling at first, then steady. The baby's crying softened, then ceased. She held it longer than necessary, afraid to let go. By noon, she realized the milk was gone. The baby needed more than she had. She hesitated, glancing toward the sleeping infant and the man splitting wood outside, then wrapped her scarf around her neck. "I'll ride to town," she told him. "We're low on supplies." He paused mid-swing. "You should not go alone." "I always go alone." Something in his expression, half concern, half understanding, made her chest tighten. He nodded once, returning to the work, and she set off down the narrow trail toward the valley road. The snow groaned beneath her boots. The air tasted like iron. By the time the roofs of Clearwater appeared, she could already feel the eyes waiting for her. The general store bell chimed as she entered. Mrs. Greer was behind the counter, sleeves rolled, her sharp gaze bright as steel. The woman's smile was thin. "Well, Eleanor Finch," she drawled. "Didn't think the storm'd let you out." "Ran out of milk," Eleanor said, setting her basket down. "For a child." Mrs. Greer's brow arched. "A child? I didn't know you'd one hiding up there." Eleanor's fingers stiffened around the counter. "Not mine. A traveler's." He had nowhere else to go. The older woman leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper that carried. "You're keeping an Indian under your roof?" Conversation in the store stilled. Two ranch hands near the flour sacks turned. Eleanor felt the heat rise in her cheeks, the kind that burned not from shame, but from being seen too clearly. "He's done no harm," she said, her voice steady but low. Mrs. Greer sniffed. "That may be. But folks remember what harm was done. You're too young and too soft to be playing savior, dear." She slid the bottle of milk across the counter, her gaze never leaving Eleanor's face. "We all heard the stories of what happened to your man. You think sheltering one of them will bring him back?" The words landed like stones. Eleanor paid, turned without replying, and walked out into the street. Behind her, the whispers swelled, low and poisonous. She didn't cry until she reached the ridge above town. There, with no one to see, she stopped and let the tears freeze on her cheeks. The cold bit through her gloves, but she didn't wipe them away. By the time she reached the cabin again, dusk was falling. She found the Apache inside, rocking the baby beside the fire, humming a soft tune in his own tongue. The sight was so gentle it undid her completely. He looked up. "You are cold," he said simply. "People talked," she answered, setting the milk on the table. "They think you're dangerous." He considered that for a moment, then nodded once. "They are not wrong." Her breath caught, but he continued quietly. "Once, long ago. Before white hair. Before peace. But now. I walk because I have nothing left to fight." Eleanor sank onto the stool, exhaustion pressing at her. "The child." He hesitated. "My son's." His gaze lowered to the infant's face. "And a white woman's." The words hung between them. The fire popped softly. "She died." He nodded. "Both sides hated what they made together. I buried them at the river bend and took the child. No tribe. No people. Only snow." She looked at the baby, the tiny half-blood creature breathing softly, innocent of every cruelty. Something in her chest ached with recognition. "They won't let you stay," she said, more to herself than to him. "I know." He rose, setting another log on the fire. The glow lit his hair like silver. "You could have turned us away. Why didn't you?" Eleanor stared into the flames. Because I know what it's like to be unwanted. He said nothing, but she felt the weight of his gaze. It wasn't pity, it was understanding, the kind that saw straight through walls. The wind outside shifted, carrying a distant sound, a horse's whinny, the creak of saddle leather. He moved to the window, watching. Someone comes. Two riders passed along the far ridge, their shapes black against the snow. She recognized one of them even from this distance. Mrs. Greer's son, rifle strapped across his back. "They'll tell the sheriff," Eleanor murmured. He turned toward her, his voice low. "Then I leave before they do." The words hollowed something inside her. "The storm will take you. Better that than a rope." She stepped closer, the fire between them casting both their faces in amber light. "You can't go. Not yet. Let the baby grow stronger." He studied her for a long moment, eyes unreadable. "And if they come here?" She lifted her chin. "Then I'll answer the door." For the first time he smiled, faint, sorrowful. "You have a brave heart." She looked away, flustered by the warmth those words stirred. "No. Just a stubborn one." Night gathered. The snow glittered outside like crushed glass under the moon. Inside, the cabin pulsed with quiet life. The baby's breath, the creak of logs, the soft hum of two souls too tired to be enemies. Eleanor watched the child sleep, and wondered how a stranger could bring such calm to a place built from grief. Yet beneath that calm, something else stirred. Fear, yes, but also the faintest spark of belonging. When she finally looked back at the Apache, he was gazing at the baby with eyes full of distant pain, lips moving in words she couldn't hear. She thought he was praying, until she caught one word that froze her where she stood. He had whispered her fiancé's name. The days that followed folded together like pages damp from melting snow, blurred, fragile, and unwilling to dry. The storm had broken, but the world still slept beneath its white weight. Tracks from the door vanished each morning, erased by new drifts as if no one lived here at all. Yet within the cabin, life persisted. The crack of firewood, the soft cry of the baby, and the quiet rhythm of two souls learning to share air without fear. Eleanor moved through her small world differently now. When she boiled water, she made enough for two. When she mended her quilt, she left room for another blanket beside it. The Apache, Sunk, she had learned his name, spoke little, but each of his silences carried meaning. He repaired what he could around the place. A broken hinge, a sagging fence post, even her father's rusted tools he cleaned with care. She realized, watching him work, that his gratitude was not shown in words, but in the labor of his hands. Once, as she swept the floor, she found the baby's charm again, the tiny cross carved from bone. She turned it over between her fingers, its surface smooth from years of touch. "You said your son's wife was white," she murmured, glancing at him. "Was her name Clara?" Sunk froze mid-motion, the knife in his hand stilling against the wood he'd been whittling. The fire cracked between them. For a heartbeat, only the baby's coo broke the silence. "How do you know that name?" Eleanor hesitated. "My fiancé wore a cross just like this. It was carved from the same bone. He traded with your people years ago. He never came back." His eyes lifted slowly to meet hers. "Then you know," he said softly. "He was the one who gave it to her." Her breath caught. The floor seemed to tilt. "You mean?" "He died defending her," Sunk said, his voice low, heavy. "My son found them. White men came at night. Both tribes blamed the other. But it was greed, not hate, that killed him." Eleanor's hand trembled, the charm slipping from her grasp and clattering against the floorboards. For years she'd imagined her lover slain by savage hands in darkness. To hear that he died saving someone, an Apache woman, unraveled everything she'd carried like armor. She turned away, tears gathering fast and unbidden. "I've hated the wrong people." "No," Sunk said gently. "You hated what pain taught you to hate. We all do." His words, spoken with the patience of age, fell over her like snow, quiet, heavy, and cleansing. She didn't answer, but that night when she served him stew, she set the fuller bowl before him without thinking. He inclined his head in silent thanks. Something fragile had shifted between them. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but a kind of release. The days lengthened. The baby began to smile. Small, fleeting curves of joy that pulled both their gazes like sunlight through clouds. Sometimes Eleanor caught Sunk looking at the child with awe, as though still unsure the little thing had survived this far. She began to wonder if he carried guilt deeper than words could reach. They built a routine without speaking of it. He fetched water. She sewed tiny clothes from her old dresses. At dusk they sat near the fire, listening to the wind. There was peace, but peace never lasted long in such places. It started with hoofbeats, distant, rhythmic, drawing nearer. Sunk rose before she did, instinct sharp as a blade. He set the baby in her arms and stepped to the window. 2 riders came into view, their coats dusted white, rifles slung low. "Mrs. Greer's son," Eleanor whispered, recognizing the taller one. "And the sheriff." Sunk's shoulders tightened. "They've come for me." Before she could answer, there was a hard knock on the door. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. "Eleanor Finch." The sheriff's voice boomed through the wood. "Open up." The baby stirred, whimpering. Eleanor's pulse pounded. She looked at Sunk, who stood calm but ready, the kind of stillness that came from years of danger. "Stay behind me," she said. He almost smiled. "No. I stand beside you." She unlatched the door. The wind rushed in, carrying the bitter scent of horse and sweat. The sheriff's face was red from cold, his eyes sharp with judgment. Behind him, Mrs. Greer's son sneered. "Afternoon, Miss Finch," the sheriff began. "We've had reports you're harboring a fugitive. An Apache man, possibly tied to past raids." "He's no fugitive," she said. "He's a father." The sheriff's eyes flicked past her shoulder, landing on the man by the fire. "He's no father I recognize. Step aside." She didn't move. "You step aside, Sheriff. My home's no jail." Mrs. Greer's son spat in the snow. "You've lost your wits, girl. After what their kind did to your man." Her voice shook, but not from fear. "You weren't there. And neither was I. Maybe we've been telling lies to ourselves for too long." The sheriff frowned. "I'll give you till sunrise. If he's still here come morning, I'll bring a warrant and men to take him." He turned his horse and left. Snow hissed beneath hooves as they rode away. Eleanor shut the door and leaned against it, her breath coming hard. "You should go," she whispered. Sunk looked at her, expression unreadable. "And leave you to their anger?" "They won't harm me." They might." He took a step closer. "You think I fear death?" "I think you've carried enough of it," she said, her voice cracking. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "At dawn I'll leave. But the child must stay warm. She needs milk and hands that will not tremble." Eleanor blinked through tears. "I can't keep her. She's yours." "She's everyone's now," he said quietly. "Born of 2 worlds. She will need both." The words struck something deep inside her. She looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms, its tiny mouth curved in a dream. "Then I'll keep her safe. Until you return." Sunk's eyes softened. "If the spirits will it." That night, neither of them slept. He sat by the fire, sharpening his old knife more from habit than need, while she rocked the baby and watched the shadows crawl across the walls. Outside, the snow began again, light, whispering, relentless. Just before dawn, she heard him moving. She turned and found him wrapping the child one last time in the hide blanket, the small bone cross tucked beside her. His hands lingered at the edge of the cradle. "Tracks fade quickly in this snow," he said without looking up. "Maybe that's mercy," she answered. He met her eyes, and for a moment, the silence between them was full of everything they'd left unsaid. Gratitude, grief, and something that trembled on the edge of love. He opened the door to a gray world. The wind caught his hair, silver against the dark horizon. She wanted to call out, to ask him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. Only the baby's faint cry filled the room. Eleanor stood at the window long after he vanished, watching the trail he'd left behind. The snow began to fall heavier, swallowing the prints one by one until there was nothing left. Then, far off, a shape appeared on the ridge, a dark figure kneeling in the drift. Her heart lurched. She threw on her coat, ran into the cold. By the time she reached him, he was half buried, his breath shallow. She dropped to her knees, shaking him, calling his name. His eyes fluttered open, the gray in them dulled but alive. "You shouldn't have followed," he rasped. "You shouldn't have left," she whispered, dragging his arm over her shoulder. "You've already saved one life. Don't make me bury another." Together they stumbled back toward the cabin, footprints filling fast behind them. The storm closed around them again, white and unrelenting, but she kept moving, the child's faint cry guiding her through the wind. When she reached the door, her strength broke. He fell to his knees beside the threshold, his breath steaming in the cold. She caught his face in her hands, the firelight spilling through the doorway. "Rest," she pleaded. "Please." He tried to speak, but his voice failed. Only one word escaped, a name. Not hers, not the child's, but something that made her blood run cold. It was her fiancé's last name. And then the light behind her flickered as if the fire, too, had heard the truth. The fire blazed low, throwing amber light against the walls as Eleanor worked to save him. Sunk lay near the hearth, his breath ragged, snow still melting in his hair. She pressed cloths warmed by the stove against his chest, whispering words she didn't know she remembered. Pleas, prayers, fragments of comfort she'd once used for the dying. The baby slept in the cradle beside them, unaware of the storm that raged both outside and in. "You're not dying here," Eleanor whispered fiercely. "Not after all this." He opened his eyes, pale and clouded. "I've seen many winters end this way," he murmured. "If this one does too, it's a good place to stop." Her hands trembled. "Don't say that. You've carried that child across half the world to find peace. Don't leave her before you see it." He studied her, as though seeing something he'd forgotten to believe in. "You sound like my son's wife," he said softly. "She would not let go either." She forced a smile. Then she was wise. Outside, wind rattled the shutters, the kind of wind that made even the living hold still. The fire guttered, then flared again. Eleanor fed it more wood until her palms burned from the heat. She refused to let it die. Not the fire, not him, not this fragile miracle she hadn't asked for, but could no longer imagine losing. By dawn, his fever broke. He slept deeply, the first true rest she'd seen him take. The storm too had softened. Snow fell in lazy spirals, turning the world white again as though trying to forgive itself. Eleanor stood at the window, exhausted, her breath fogging the glass. Out beyond the ridge, faint plumes of smoke rose. Too dark, too many. She knew that sight. "They're coming," she whispered. By noon, she could hear them. The clatter of hooves, the mutter of men. She looked to Sunk, who had woken, pale but steady. He knew too. He tried to stand and nearly fell. She caught him, her hands gripping his shoulders. "You can't fight them. I will not let them hurt the child, or you." Eleanor shook her head, her voice breaking. "You've done enough. Let me stand this time." He looked at her then, not as a protector, not as a man carrying guilt, but as an equal. Slowly, he nodded. The first knock came hard, impatient. She stepped to the door, heart hammering. The sheriff's voice followed, sharp through the cold. "Eleanor Finch. We warned you." She opened the door to a dozen men in the snow, rifles across their backs, Mrs. Greer's son at the front. "He's still here, isn't he?" The man sneered. "You protect a killer and a thief?" Eleanor's voice was calm, though her hands were shaking. "He's neither. He's a man who carried a child through the storm, while the rest of you hid behind your walls." "You've lost your sense," the sheriff said. "Move aside." She stood taller. "If you step inside, you'll have to shoot through me first." The men shifted uneasily, but Mrs. Greer's son raised his rifle. "Don't tempt me." The sound of the baby crying broke the air like a bell. Sunk appeared behind her, standing straight despite his weakness, the child in his arms. "No blood," he said quietly. "Not again." His calm unsettled them. The sheriff's horse stamped nervously. "Hand him over, Eleanor. Don't make this worse." But the snow had begun to fall harder again, the wind cutting sideways, filling the silence between their breaths. And then, somewhere behind the ridge, thunder cracked, not from the sky but from within the clouds themselves, echoing like cannon fire. The men flinched. The horses reared. "Go home," Eleanor said, her voice low but steady. "Go before the storm buries you too." The sheriff hesitated. The wind howled louder, erasing the edges of their courage. One by one, the riders turned their horses, their shapes swallowed by white until only Mrs. Greer's son remained. He stared at Eleanor, hatred twisting his face. "You'll regret this." She met his gaze. "No. I already spent my life regretting things I didn't do." He spat into the snow, then rode off. When the sound of hooves faded, the world returned to stillness. Eleanor closed the door, leaning against it as her knees gave way. The baby had stopped crying. Tsunk stood in the glow of the fire, the child cradled close, his breath unsteady but his eyes bright. "You spoke like a warrior," he said quietly. She looked up at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "I spoke like a woman tired of burying what's good." He crossed to her, his movements slow, reverent. "You saved me twice," he said. "Once from the snow and once from myself." Eleanor rose, her fingers brushing his arm. "Maybe we both needed saving." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The baby stirred, a soft sound like a sigh between them. Tsunk reached up, touched a strand of her hair where the firelight turned it gold. "When the snow melts," he said, "I will bury my son and his wife properly. Then I will leave. The world will not have peace for me." Her throat tightened. "Then let this place remember you kindly." He smiled faintly. "It already does." The days that followed were gentler. The sky softened from iron to pearl. Together they built a small cradle from cedar and scraps of his saddle. When he was strong enough, he dug a grave beneath the oak tree where her fiancé's marker stood. Two small crosses now faced each other, one carved in pine, one in bone. Eleanor watched him kneel there at dusk, his silver hair gleaming. He didn't speak. The wind moved through the branches, carrying a sound like breath, like forgiveness. When he rose he looked lighter, though his eyes still held the distance of men who belonged to many worlds and none. "You'll go when the thaw comes," she said quietly. He nodded. "But not tonight." That evening, they sat by the fire as the snow began again. Not fierce but soft, as though blessing what had survived. The baby slept between them. Eleanor reached to adjust the blanket, her hand brushing his. Neither pulled away. "I used to think the world took everything from me," she said. "But maybe it was just waiting to give me something I could keep." Tsunk's gaze softened. "Fire beneath the snow," he said. "Cold above, but warmth below if you keep digging." The phrase lingered in the air, wrapping around them like smoke. When morning came, the world was washed clean. He saddled his horse slowly, the baby swaddled on Eleanor's back. The air was sharp but bright, carrying the scent of thawing pine. He turned once before mounting, his voice rough with something like wonder. "You have the strength of 2 winters, Eleanor Finch. The child will grow in peace because of you. And you," she said, "will never walk alone again. Not while this land remembers your name." He looked toward the horizon, then back at her. "Then it will remember both of us." She watched him ride out, his figure shrinking into the pale distance until only a single line of tracks remained, long, deliberate, and unbroken. The wind tried to erase them, but not fast enough. She stood there until they vanished, then turned back toward the cabin, where the fire still burned steady and bright. In the hush that followed, she looked at the baby sleeping against her and whispered, "We'll keep it alive, his fire, his peace." The wind quieted, as if listening. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Finch felt the warmth of something deeper than survival. It was not the blaze of passion, nor the echo of grief, just the steady, enduring glow of having chosen to stay when it would have been easier to let go.